Well, hi there, and welcome to this webcast live stream thing with me. It's good to have you here. My name is Jonathan Foust. I'm delighted to have this time with you. We have a timely talk from the archives, which I'm going to introduce, and we'll have a short meditation before we go into. With this fall, it's for many people a time of kind of starting over, and that is our theme. Certainly, it's a pertinent one for me. Before we begin, a couple announcements. First of all, a big thank you to the Insight Meditation Community of Washington for hosting this, and to Glenn Harrison, our producer. A big thank you to Rita Moran, our Mindful Movement leader. 6:30 Eastern Standard Time, you can join Rita for Mindful Movement, and that will take you right up here, 7:30, for this meditation and talk. The link for Mindful Movement is available on my Facebook page and on my website. Got a newsletter that I send out every now and then with my best photography and compendium of talks, upcoming events, that sort of thing. Comes out every couple of months. I also have a weekly. You can sign up for that on my website. And as always, this is all offered in the spirit of generosity, of dana. That is to say, there's no charge, there are no ads, there's no shameless, well, there is shameless promotion, but it's all offered freely. So anyone who's interested is never to be denied access. This only happens because of generosity. And if you feel inspired to support this, thank you, thank you. Really appreciate it. So this talk is on starting over in your life, which is a pretty pertinent theme. And I thought we might make this as kind of the theme of our meditation, this whole idea of starting again. I always like to quote S.N. Goenka, that was basically his meditation instruction, was start again. Start again, as he would say it. So if you like, take some time just to move your body. You might close your eyes. Just get a sense of what is going to most support you in letting your body be still. You might know also, as you let your body come into a still point, use your breath as a way of gathering your attention. Perhaps the most ideal breath would be long and slow and deep. You might find it helpful to breathe in to the count of 4, and then glide right into the exhalation to the count of 4. And if you like, for the next minute or so, let this be your primary focus. Breathe in to the count of 4, and then breathe out to the count of 4. You may notice after just a few rounds of breath that you're already beginning to gather your attention right here, right now. I'd like to offer you a variation on this breath, only if it feels right for you, and that is to breathe in slowly to the count of 4, and then exhale to the count of 5 or 6. So you're lengthening the exhalation. And do this for about 5 breaths and notice what happens. You may notice if you are lengthening the exhalation longer than the inhalation that you are invoking more and more of the relaxation response, a sense of softening inward. Feel free now, if you like, to release the breath or continue if it feels good for you. And let's take a few moments now to explore moving even deeper into this experience of the felt sense inside. Feel all the muscles of your face relaxing. Let your face be expressionless. Forehead smooth. The tongue relaxing, filling your lower jaw. Relaxing the root of your tongue down into your throat. Sensing the back of the head, base of the skull. You might feel or imagine now the weight of your arms. Feeling your arms like heavy drapes hanging from your shoulders as you sense down through your elbows. And down through the wrists. Awareness flooding into the palms. Could you soften your belly? And imagine that relaxation flowing into the lower back, the buttocks, the floor of the pelvis, the lower abdomen. Over the next few breaths, how much more could soften or relax here? Can you feel or imagine the volume and the length and the weight of your legs? Sensing down through the knees. Down through your ankles. And sensing now the soles of the feet and the heels. Deeply relaxed. You might now shift your attention to a focal point or to an anchor. For some, it's the breath. For some, sounds. For others, the feeling in the palms. Whatever anchor you feel drawn to for these next few minutes, just another 5 minutes. Notice how intimately you can experience your anchor from the inside. Breath, sound, the feeling in the palms. When your mind wanders, start again. as many times as your mind may wander. That many times you can return to the here and now. Noting how intimately you can relax, soften, receive the moment. You might imagine now that your anchor, breath or sound or feeling or whatever anchor you're using, is the center of a target. And you might also notice that there's a periphery to the target. There are sensations, sounds, feelings, thoughts, emotions. Is it possible for the next minute or so to be aware of the anchor, be aware of the center of the target, but also to relax and widen your attention, to notice what's changing? When the mind is far away, start again. Relax. Connect with your anchor. Broaden and widen your attention. In this remaining minute or so, how much more could you explore softening, relaxing? And can you imagine at the same time the sharpening of awareness, what's changing, and your capacity to let things be? You might gently begin to lengthen your breath a little bit. Take notice now of how you're feeling. What has shifted in this last 12 or 13 minutes of practice? What is the quality of presence right now? As you're ready, you can deepen your breath, and if you like, you can open your eyes. No rush, no hurry. Keep them closed if you like. In meditation practice, we start again. We come back to the here and now. In that same way in life, when we get caught into the future, into the past, when our mind is hijacked by all those different forms of fear, anxiety, doubt, aversion, wanting, desire, starting over can be a wonderful opportunity to arrive, not just in meditation, but to ask yourself, what's most important right now? This following talk is about starting over in your life, and I hope you find it helpful. Thank you. Thank you so much, and enjoy the following talk. Many, many years ago, as I have mentioned many times, perhaps ad nauseum, I lived in a spiritual community, in particular, Kripalu Center, or the Kripalu Yoga Ashram back in those days. And yoga was kind of a booming thing back then. But when I moved in, no one really knew what yoga was. Most people assumed it was a cultured dairy product, but it was booming at that time. So our little ashram grew and grew and grew, and then we actually outgrew a facility. We moved from a funky little camp in Pennsylvania up to this 5 acres under one roof former Jesuit seminary in western Massachusetts, and then we grew even more. So being a member of that community was kind of like being in a boom time of any business that's just growing, and it was a great opportunity to take on new things. Sometimes things I really didn't want to take on, but at one point it was like, okay, we need someone to do fundraising. So I did fundraising for a couple of years, and then there was this recognition, like, because we're growing so fast, there's so little coordination among all the departments, and so everyone was sending out their own individual mailings, and we were having people complaining, saying, hey, I'm getting 3 letters a day, one about fundraising and one about new programs and another one about this. So I was given this task, for which I was not well prepared, to do an assessment of all of our communications going out, and then to look at how we might condense it into like one publication, perhaps a magazine. It seemed kind of exciting, so I said yes. I would have said yes anyway, and I launched into this whole thing of doing an assessment and an inventory of what every department in our whole organization. And we're like 300 full-time residents, and at that point, I forget how many guests a year, but we had about room for 300 people, so 10 program rooms, all this stuff going on. So I had to look at all the communications going out, look at the cost of all those communications going out, and then put together a proposal for a magazine that we would do that would have all the communications under one roof. I was working with 2 other people who were kind of supporting me in this process, and it took forever. This was actually a 2-year process, and I'm a bit of a workaholic and a bit of a perfectionist, so I poured myself into this, and we kind of got the assessment figured out, and then we put together this proposal for the editorial board and what we were going to cover in the magazine, and it was very detailed, and I just put myself into it. At one point, just when the proposal was all put together and then finalizing it for the board, and I had never done a board report, so first time always takes longer than you imagine. I've submitted the report to the board, and then right at that time, the 2 people who were working with me, a male and female, we were a celibate community, decided that they were in love with each other and they were going to leave the ashram. So there was my 2 editors were just suddenly poof, gone. And then the board got back to me and said, thanks so much for this proposal. It looks too expensive. I think we're not going to do it. And suddenly I was just bereft. What had just happened? I spent 2 years doing this whole cost assessment, coming up with this whole creative design, and it just absolutely disappeared, like in 1 minute. My editorial board, which wasn't going to be used anyway, disappeared, and all this work was seemingly for naught. And I found myself unable to let it go. I just kept obsessing on, like, why did I say yes to this? Why did I pour all of my life force for all this time into this project that was absolutely worthless? What kind of a mindless soldier am I that I would just say, yes, I'll do it without thinking about anything other than just saying yes to something? What kind of a spineless person am I? What kind of a non-directed yes man am I that I would say yes to such a futile project, and all kinds of self-recrimination. And I was getting kind of sick of my story, which is always a good sign, because I notice when I kind of get sick of me playing the same loop, I know that something's going to shift. And so I was meditating. I have a pretty strong meditation practice, and one morning, as I was just sitting with my just inner disgust toward myself and my inability to let go, and my what now story inside, I remembered one of the coolest things I had read and seen, which was Zorba the Greek by Kazantzakis. And I remember this one scene in particular. And if you haven't read the book or you haven't seen the movie, maybe you want to turn this off right now, because this is a major spoiler alert. It's the story of this Englishman who inherits this island in Greece. And he's very meek and mild and very shy. And he meets Zorba. And Zorba is this wild, full-bore Greek guy. And Zorba says stuff like, to be alive is to loosen your belt and look for trouble. He just wades right into it. And they come up with this idea, or Zorba comes up with this idea, that on this island, which this guy owns, that they're going to cut the timber from the top of the mountain, and they set up these pulleys and cables to bring the trees down, and then they're going to saw that up, and they're going to use that to build a mine, going in, and they're going to get all the riches out of the earth. So they spend every last penny that this guy has for this contraption that they've built. And the whole village is there, and the priest is there. And they send down the first tree, and everything's very, very, very shaky. And all the villagers are afraid. They jump back. And they send down the next tree. It's even shakier. And these trees they're coming down on these pulleys and cables. The next one they send down, the entire thing collapses, and it's an absolute destroyed mess. And all the villagers are frightened. They run away, and the priest comes over and personally spits on them, and that's it. All their money is invested into this project. It's an utter catastrophe. Society has utterly rejected them. And they're just standing there on the beach on this island looking at each other. And Zorba, after a long pause, goes, and he starts dancing. And these two guys are just dancing like maniacs on the beach. That's the end of the movie and the end of the book. So I'm sitting there in meditation with my eyes closed, replaying this whole thing, and suddenly I just go, and I felt the whole thing shift. And then that became my anchor. Like whenever I would find myself beginning to obsess and go into self-recrimination, I would just go. And that worked for a while. And actually, I told a couple people about it, and what was really nasty was whenever I would be complaining about something, they would go. I still go back to that every now and then. Why am I telling this story? Well, I want to talk about, just as we talked about last week, starting over in your meditation practice, some thoughts about starting over in life when you're going through change. To me, the most interesting people are the people who have gone through like multiple incarnations in one life. And I've told this story before of Eric Kassir, who I met in Germany. I'm sorry, I met him in New Mexico toward the end of his life. He lived outside of Santa Fe at that time. He had this beautiful spread of buildings that he designed and built. He was this little meditation temple, and met him through a good friend, and we spent a number of days. And as he shared his life story, he grew up in Germany, and he was in high school when Hitler came to power. He wrote a high school essay against the government, and he was told that he should leave the country because it wasn't safe for him in the country anymore. And as he told the story, he immigrated to Canada and took up work as a plumber. And then after a couple of years, he was head of the plumbers union in Canada. Then he moved to California and he sold used cars, got a job selling used cars. And then he built up the largest used car dealership in the state. And because he was building these new car dealerships, he was building buildings. And he enjoyed building these facilities. So he created a business creating large office buildings. And he did that. And then at one point he discovered meditation, and he discovered like working with energy. He did I think a weekend at Esalen in California, and then he decided, this is what I want to do now. And he kind of traveled the world teaching people how to work with their energy and feeling and so forth. And how he had it within him to start over and over and over was quite fascinating. And I know a number of people, and I'm sure you do too, people who have a capacity to start over. But I also know lots of people who've been in extended shock after losing a job or a relationship, who have not been able to start over, or who have really, really struggled. So what I'd like to share with you is just some thoughts about what it means to start over with mindfulness. Point number one that I'll explore is, contrary to Jack Nicholson's character in A Few Good Men, you can handle the truth, but you're also entitled to your first reaction. And point two, how to work with loss. And point three, how to open to new possibilities. And point four, how to recalibrate and move forward when it's time to start over. A lot of what I'll be sharing is somewhat autobiographical. I've had some opportunities to start over, but I'm hoping there might be something in here if you're ever at a point when you're in a point of transition. At one point, with all my years of living in this community at Kripalu Center over 24 years, toward the end, I was the kind of acting CEO. And one thing I had to learn, which I had never done before, was how to fire someone. And I called up one of my best friends who had a career of firing people, basically. And he told me about the best practice for firing someone. He said, what you do is you go into their office and you say, things aren't working out and we need to make some changes. And we're going to have to let you go. But what I want to do is for you to take some time and just reflect, and let's find a time when we can meet and talk about the next steps, because I want to find a way to support you so your transition is going to be as smooth as possible. The point there was, and then he said, and then leave. He said, it's so important you let them have their first reaction. And what he said was how before he learned how to do this, he would, the first time actually was really poignant for him. It was like he hired someone who was one of his best friends, and he had to let him go. And his friend went into every reaction every reaction possible, from anger to tears, and they were crying together. And he realized later that's not the way to do it. Some people will go into anger. Some people go into shock. Some people go into despair. But what he found was to let someone know the bad news, let them have their reaction, and then to meet later was a much more respectful way to kind of go through that process. And I can imagine for you, when you've gone through loss, whether either a loss of a job or loss of someone you love, what was your first reaction? What was your second reaction? Chances are you may have felt despair or anger or hopelessness or depression, our first reaction is an important thing to be aware of and make room for. These teachings say that suffering comes from attachment. And we're naturally wired to care about what we're doing. We're naturally wired to care about what we have in our lives. And when that falls short of reality, when we realize that this is changing and we don't want it to change, to the degree that we're attached, we're going to feel stress, we're going to feel suffering, we're going to feel that pain. So with that, when the world falls apart, when the world as you know it falls apart, it's so helpful to make room, really make room for the whole process of healing. And that first step is to make room for whatever arises. Stress and suffering happen in life. There's a cause for that stress and suffering. It has to do with attachment. And it's possible to let go, but it requires really being mindful around the process. Quite often, we have trouble handling the first shock when it comes to loss and having to start over again. And we go into a stress response. Either we get locked into anger, aversion, ill will, and blame, or we utterly disassociate from what's happening, or we freeze up inside. Bringing awareness and bringing some compassion to that can be so, so helpful. In my years of living in community, I had an arranged marriage, which is kind of a wild thing in the West, to a wonderful person. We're no longer married, but a wonderful person. And at one point, she was 8.5 months pregnant with a vibrant, bouncy little baby. And then one morning, there was just no movement. And I will never forget going into the doctor for the ultrasound and the doctor saying, "I'm sorry, your baby's dead," of the absolute blinding grief, that searing experience of loss. The whole story that I had built up, that we had built up. The first reaction was absolutely stunned. But then life moves on. And it's so easy to move on too quickly. And one of the things I so admire about my then wife was how she truly allowed herself to grieve. Khalil Gibran said, if you do not grieve fully, you will cry but not all your tears, and you will laugh but not all your laughter. And she allowed herself to feel it fully. And it took years. It truly took years for her. She's an artist, a singer, a dancer, and it began to move through. And at some point, what really drew her alive was returning for her back to acting and dancing and teaching. And on top of that, we had a major crisis in the community where it turned out that the teacher was not in full integrity. I'll just leave it at that. And he was asked to leave, and we were asked to leave. The entire facility was going through a very, very profound transformation. So that was quite a time of having to start over. So when something is taken away, a job, a relationship, a project, you will react. And you are entitled to that reaction. And if you don't make room for it fully, it will always be there. It'll always be there. I once did a weekend seminar, a very intense seminar. And there was a woman who would quite often raise her hand, and she would object to something that was being spoken. And she would say, well, when I went through my divorce, this is what my husband told me, and da 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 da. And then again, she'd raise her hand and say, well, my husband told me when we divorced. And she kept referencing her divorce. And obviously, it was very, very clear that she was very wounded around this. And she was so vocal, it was starting to annoy people a little bit. And at one point, the guy leading this seminar, as he was taking yet another question from her, he said, let me just ask a question. When did you divorce? And she said, 37 years ago. If we don't grieve fully, if we don't process what's arising in the midst of any change or transformation, then we're kind of doomed to kind of carry those unhealed wounds with us. And so the main point here is that when you feel that void of unknowing, ask yourself if you can stay there. And what happens for many, many people is that sense of unknowing brings in a reaction where they just want to make something happen. And then they just take the first job that comes, or they buy a house, or they flip a house, or they have another child, anything to kind of create a narrative that they can live into. But it's so important to pause, to kind of call in your allies and create as much of a healing space as you can. And then perhaps some new possibilities might begin to open for you. You know, as I've often shared, I stumbled into this community for lunch, and I stayed for 24 years. Over the course of my time there, I was a writer. I raised a lot of money, for a number of years. I was a teacher. I was the warm-up act for the Guru on the road for a while. I was an administrator. I was the acting CEO for a few years. I was completely dedicated to the mission of this community. And I was actually even the voice of Kripalu. When we got a new voicemail system, it was my voice that would welcome you whenever you called. So if you've ever called Kripalu Center between, let's say, like 1984 and, let's say, another 10 or 15 years, you would hear this. Thank you for calling Kripalu Center. If you're calling from a touch-tone phone and know the 3-digit extension number of the person you're calling, please enter that extension number now. My whole adult life was identified with this place, and I was supporting the CEO before me, one of my best friends, and we worked really, really hard to help to turn around the community from what it was, which was a teacher-based community, into a more ecumenical, non-sectarian program center. And he poured himself into it and started to get sick. And so I decided to step in. And I was there for a good number of years. And at some point, I realized I can't go on. I just can't do this. I realized that I wanted to be the guy showing up to teach, not the guy worried about the strategic plan whether the fuel bill was paid. And so when I clarified with the board, this wasn't working. I was not a great CEO. I worked, I tried, but I wasn't cut out for it. But then I realized that after you're in charge of something, where do you go? What do you do? And so I found myself very much in this sense of, what am I going to do? Where am I going to live? How much money do I have to figure out whatever the heck I'm going to do next? Do I sell my house? Do I stay here? Can I take time to retreat? One of my great mentor friends, when I told him that I was going to be stepping down, he said, that's great. He said, now I want to see if you have the cojones not to grab the first shiny thing that comes your way. And one of the best pieces of advice I ever got, because I was ready to grab anything that would give me a sense that I was on a narrative that was moving forward. When we're in that place of unknowing, in that place between trapeze bars, it's really helpful, I found, at least for myself, to reflect on the difference between form and essence. The form is what you're going to do, what you're going to do next. The essence is what that feels like inside, or what you want it to feel like inside. So I had some time to really ask myself, well, how do I want to feel moving forward? Well, how do I wanted to contribute. I wanted to be creative. I wanted to serve and help people if I could. I knew the essence. I had no idea what the form was. So I would imagine that you've gone through some big transitions in your life. That sense of like, this is over, I can't go back. You just let go of a trapeze bar. And then there's that space in between that can be filled with despair. It's so important not to rush, because this is about getting aligned with reality. One of my friends was really worried about his daughter was just doing terribly in high school. And he said, honey, I'm really, really worried that you're not going to have anything to kind of support you in life unless you really start to focus. And she said, it's okay, Dad, don't worry. I'm going to marry a movie star. So we want to get reality-based here. So after I had let go of this job, but I was still in my position as CEO. I had 6 months to help the board, to cover my bases until the board figured out what was next. We had a conference at Kripalu. It was called East Meets East, Yoga and Buddhism. So we brought in some Buddhist teachers, and I was kind of representing the yoga team along with a couple other yoga folks. And one of the Buddhist teachers was this Tara Brach person, and we met. We had an instant connection. For both, it was like an instant yes. And after a pretty intense period, I was moving to Washington, D.C. And again, I knew the essence of what I wanted to do, but I wasn't sure if I were to teach or what I would do. I remember when I arrived here in D.C. and I met someone, and one of Tara's friends, I think, and they said, well, they asked me, well, so what do you do? What have you done? And I said, well, have you ever heard of this place called Kripalu Center? And he said, no. And I said, well, that place you never heard of, I used to be somebody there. And that void of unknowing was quite powerful. And I went through a real profound process of deconstruction. And I think, again, when you're starting over, it's another part of letting go of the attachment. And for me, it was realizing how identified I was with who I was before this transition. And I came across a really beautiful book. The book is it's a long title. It's called War is a Force That Gives Us Meaning. It's written by a New York Times war correspondent who covered a number of wars. And he was curious, like, what is it about when people are in a war situation that they re-enlist? So many people re-enlist. And what he recognized was that when you're in a situation where people are depending on you, and you're depending on other people, and if someone screws up, the consequences are lethal. That is actually a very, very powerful experience. It's an experience of absorption. It's kind of an addictive experience. And I realized that part of the sadness of the grief that I felt was that I was missing my executive team, because we were in the trenches together, relying on each other every day. And that feeling of really feeling connected to a mission and purpose was something that I was that I was really missing. So part of that process was of deconstruction for me, of giving myself time to let go and to grieve fully. But it's also a beginning to ask, well, what is the essence of what I want to do, and what might the form be? And so I created this little rule and I'd done this before when I realized, hey, I want to develop myself as a teacher, where I just said to the universe, I will teach anything to anyone, anytime, anywhere. And so whatever invitation there was, the answer was yes. I did this for about a year. So I was doing junior high school health and wellness days, talking to seventh and eighth graders about meditation and trying to find a way to connect with them. I was going into to a group of therapists who wanted to hear about mindfulness. I started a little class to see if maybe this is something I want to do just locally. I got to do an 8-week series for the DC Superior Court justices on mindfulness, and I began to get a sense of what do I do? What do I want to do more of? What do I want to begin to wean? And things began to shift. And I found myself doing more and more of what I really enjoy, and I am so enjoying my life. So starting over, there are a few things I'd like to offer. Again, there's so much to say about starting over in life, but a couple points I'd like to make. The first one is recognizing that it's about what's happening, but it's also about how you're relating to what's happening. And reality is based on your perceptions. There's a very big difference between why is this happening to me and what did I do wrong, to asking yourself, well, what's great about this? Or what could be great about this? Where's the opportunity here? And I remember in a particular feeling of dread after I was letting go of my whole 24 years of identity with this community, a little voice said, 2 years from now, you're going to look back and say this is the best thing that ever happened to you. And I remember that, and I really kind of installed that as a kind of an anchor for myself. It was absolutely true. It absolutely was the best thing that ever could have happened to me. So to really ask yourself whenever you're in transition, what's great about this? Or what could be great about it? Where are the opportunities here? The next thing you might explore is the reality of what are the challenges that you have? What will it take in the short term for you to survive? What support do you need to help you in the short term and in the long term? It was very interesting. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is a wonderful metaphor of how if you're concerned about your physical safety and where your next meal is coming from, it's impossible to feel creativity or feel any sense of gratitude or spirituality or spiritual expression. So to really ensure what do you need to feel safe in the short term, that is going to support you in moving forward. The mentor I had mentioned earlier offered me another wonderful thing, and part of his strategy in life was to figure out who his anchor customers were. His career was in sales. He said you figure out your anchor customers, and the anchor customers or the anchor customer is the one who pays your bills. He said, now your next thing is to focus on making them really happy with as little time and energy as possible, which will free you up for your R&D, your research and development. So establishing that sense of safety, where you feel safe enough, where you can cover the bases, that's going to allow you to kind of open up more of your creativity, more of your intuitive faculties, is so important. The next thing to think about is when you're in a time of transition and starting over is what's important to you? What are your values? And for some, it's not so much about the work as it is about the work supporting their life. The work is what allows them to live. Ken Wilber, the incredible author, in the beginning of his writing career, chose mindless jobs. He just wanted jobs that didn't require a lot of intellectual ability so that he could kind of ruminate and reflect on the work that he was doing in his writing. And I know a good number of people who they expressly want to have a job that they can leave where it is so that they can live their life. One person I know said, I want a job that I can leave at work so I can be there for my 3 kids and my wife. Having that as a value and a priority was very, very helpful for him. The other is to ask yourself, what kind of people do you want to work with? There's some beautiful teachings around right livelihood, through this lens of the Buddhist tradition. And essentially, it's like right livelihood is asking yourself, is what you're offering life enhancing? Is what you're offering serving? Also, another part of starting over is to really reflect on not only what is most going to support you in the short term, not only to create the space for you to deconstruct the old self and take time to reflect on what most enlivens you and what most calls you, reflect on the essence, the feeling that you want to be experiencing as you move forward. But it's also very, very helpful to create structure for yourself. It's what many, many people find, certainly what I found. What are the next steps? What's most important to prioritize? What allies would be most helpful for you? Do you need training? Do you need coaching? And one of the most important elements that I have found, I know many people have found, is to really explore, number one, motivation, and second, the habits that move you forward. And the motivation can be why. The why. Why do you want to move forward? And how do you want to feel at the end of your life as you look back? And if you're exploring a possibility, ask yourself, well, why is this important to me? That will help you to kind of sense whether there's passion for you. And creating the habits that are going to support you in helping you fill your cup. Because in times of transition, when you're starting over from a loss of relationship or job or project or anything, it's very, very easy to kind of get just caught in that stasis point. What are the structures in your life that are going to support you? What are the disciplines that are going to help you kind of build up your energy, fill your cup so you're overflowing? And how can you keep your sense of aliveness and positivity flowing? There's a beautiful quote from Carlos Castaneda, who said that whatever you choose, you have to choose a path with heart. He said, if it doesn't have heart, it's worthless. So whenever you sense that which is calling you forward, take some time to reflect. Does this path have a heart to it? Does this path enliven me in a way that brings me into a sense of fullness and aliveness? So just as in any given moment we're starting over, sometimes in life we're starting over, sometimes in dramatic ways. When you have that sense that something's coming to an end, at some point you have to let go of this trapeze bar and you're hoping there's another one out there. It can be helpful to reflect on your perception. Where's the opportunity? What could be great about this? And to ask yourself what's most important, how you want to feel at the end, and what's going to help you move forward. Let's take a few moments. We're going to end with just a few minutes of meditation. If you'd like, you can close your eyes. And notice the movement of the breath. And you might sense how each breath is a falling away. In its essence, each breath is a dying away of the known. And each in-breath is arriving in a new moment. When you deeply and fully relax, you might sense this cycle of falling away and re-arriving. And you might sense what's falling away in your life. What's changing? Is there a sense of what's calling you forward? And reflecting on these four essential teachings, the four cornerstones of this practice. And whenever you're going through any kind of transition, acknowledging that the stress of life is part of the human experience. Fear, anxiety, all the different plays of emotion. And that when you really slow down and pay attention, that wherever there is stress or any form of suffering, that there is something here at the cause. It has something to do with identification, with holding on. And that it's possible to let go. And as you let go, that you can let go into this field of infinite possibility. And in the letting go, that there is a path. There are practices and observations that can lead you forward. That it's possible to be more and more guided by both wisdom and compassion. And you might take these final moments just to sense what life feels like with a full and overflowing cup. And in your own way, wishing yourself well in your journey. As you're ready now, you can deepen your breath. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Whatever changes you're going through in your life, however you are starting over, I so wish you well in your journey. Thank you so much for your time and attention. Many blessings, and I look forward to being with you again. Happy trails.